We are officially one quarter of the way through 2024, and what better way to checkpoint this point in the year than to reflect on the books I've read so far and see which ones that I've loved the most. So in this video, I'm going to be listing you the favourite books that I've read so far this year, and telling you what they're about and what I liked about them. All the books included were rated 4 stars and above, and they're going to be in order of preference, so stick around to the end to find out which one's actually my favourite book of the year so far. I talk about each of these books in more details in my monthly reading wrap-ups, which I'll link all of them down below. And also, welcome to the channel, I'm Katerina. Alright, let's get into it. The very first book on my list is Why We Eat Too Much by Andrew Jenkins, and I gave this book 4 stars. So the author of this book is actually a doctor, and using 20 years of experience and research with working with overweight patients, he examines how today's Western diet impacts our appetite and our metabolism, ultimately exhibiting how current nutrition affects body weight and why modern fad diets don't work. I'd like to mention that this isn't necessarily a diet book, and you won't find any groundbreaking secrets on how to lose weight, but instead teaches you more about nutrition and how to improve your diet, which foods are most beneficial to the human body, which in long term can help you lose weight and also to keep it off. I rated this book highly because it really turned around the perception I had of weight loss in my head, in terms of seeing food as actually nutritional value and not just counting calories and seeing foods as numbers. And one thing I also found super interesting was how the book explored how the food industry actually creates certain myths around foods in order to drive up profits, such as saying that fat is bad for you and everything suddenly being low fat, but instead they inject sugar in everything, which is cheaper to make. And I also really like the book because I find a lot of science books can be quite technical for lay people like myself who don't really understand the jargon and technical terms, but this was super easy to understand and comprehend all the scientific things that he was talking about, which in my mind is great because I don't think that we should be gatekeeping this sort of knowledge to the general public. The second book on my list is All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir, and I also rated this 4 stars. This book follows a Muslim Pakistani American family living in California, and it alternates between 3 different people's perspectives: a mother, her son, and the son's best friend. And it explores their struggles in identifying themselves as well as their identities, especially when it comes to being Muslim, in a town that ultimately rejects them for being different as the people there try to other them. This book is about grief, failure, love, loss, and forgiveness. I really like this book because I feel like it was such a raw and honest narrative of what immigrants especially go through in the West, and it explores some incredibly dark topics like illness, grief, domestic violence, alcoholism. And whilst these issues can obviously affect anyone, the book very specifically shows how it affects immigrants as opposed to nationals, and consequently the trauma that family and friends face when dealing with other people that are close to them that face these sort of issues. All in all, I thought that this book explores the struggles that can be really easily overlooked that these groups face, and I really rated how the author handled these very dark topics very beautifully and honestly. The next book on my list is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, and I also gave this book 4 stars. This book is about a destitute and desperate former law student who wanders around the slums of St. Petersburg, Russia, and one day commits an act of murder for money without any remorse or regret, because he imagines himself to be beyond the conventional moral laws. But he then embarks on a dangerous cat and mouse game with the police, until one day the main character is overcome by his own guilt. This book very pleasantly surprised me, as it was so much more than just a guy feeling guilty about a murder, but it also includes descriptive yet engaging blends on different commentaries on various aspects, including aspects on philosophy, politics, religion, morality, sociology. And even this aside, the plot was so suspenseful, as I was constantly on my edge of my seat trying to work out whether he was going to get caught or not from moment to moment. Plus, I found this novel super unique in exploring the human capacity not only for evil but also for remorse and guilt, which is not something that I've seen at all explored in books, so this was really eye-opening to me, and that's why it's one of my favourites for this year. For the 4th book on my list, or maybe I should say novella because it's literally only 50 pages long, but anyway, it's The Curious Case of Benjamin Button by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and I also gave this book 4 stars. This is a witty and fantastical tale that follows the life of a man who one day was born as a withered senior and very mysteriously ages backwards. And as he grows younger, he embraces life with wisdom and knowledge that's acquired. He does many things in his life, including running a business, going to war, falling in love, having kids, going to college, until one day his mind starts to slowly devolve until he's young enough to then pass as a baby. This is such a gorgeously absurd and melancholic tale that you can honestly read in one sitting, and it's essentially a clever satire about aging and American culture. And it showcases that age is just a number and we shouldn't be using this to limit ourselves to doing what we want in life. I will also say that the book is nowhere near as dark and serious as the film is. The book definitely has more of a comedic flair because it's very obviously written in a satirical manner, such as it has quite slapstick comedy with elderly behaviour and toddler mannerisms in tandem with each other, which I personally love because I found it very entertaining to read. But it was also super philosophical by teaching very implicit life lessons within the pages, and that's why I rated this book quite highly. The next book on my list is Heaven by Mieko Kawakami, and I'm sure you'll be relieved to hear that this is the last book on my list that I gave 4 stars to. This is a Japanese novel that follows a 14-year-old boy who is relentlessly bullied by his other classmates for having a lazy eye. He soon befriends another girl in his class who is also bullied but for having a dirty and unkempt appearance, and they both choose to suffer and accept this abuse in complete resignation even when it turns violent. These two teenagers form a close bond, and together they try and seek explanations for their torment. And the novel essentially questions how sustainable is their friendship when it's built on traumatic foundations. I love this book because it had some very interesting philosophical conversations about who we deem as the weak in society and why they seem to be picked out to be antagonized by others. In this case, it's their physical traits that make them different from the other kids that bully them. And I also found it a very clever writing choice from the author to have these two teenagers have different explanations and reasons for why they're being bullied. One believes that their suffering has meaning and that one day they will be rewarded for choosing to accept it now, whereas the other one has more of a nihilistic approach and doesn't believe it has any meaning at all. And I think this is a clever writing choice because it allows you as a reader to facilitate self-reflection and see where you kind of fit in between these two perspectives. I also just love this author's work in general because she just writes the most real and amazing conversations and dialogue in books, so of course this was going to be one of my favourite books of the year. The next book on my list is Ripe by Sarah Rose Etter, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. This book follows a young woman working at a Silicon Valley startup company, and she essentially finds herself trapped in a toxic corporate nightmare, as she's having to deal with working around the clock, horrible bosses, and even illegal projects. And when she initially joined, she was optimistic, thinking that she finally made it, but the novel explores the dark reality of working in this environment and also living in a city where obscene wealth and extreme poverty exist side by side to each other. Whilst this book is admittedly incredibly depressing, I actually did feel super seen when I was reading it, as it very much addressed the existential anxieties and frustrations I had around late-stage capitalism and working culture. And it felt very much validating that other people were also thinking the same thing. And since reading this novel, I actually attended a book club in London where this book was discussed. And it was incredibly interesting to hear how other people who also worked in very intense corporate jobs like myself really resonated with the book. And it felt very much validating to hear that other people thought the same thing, because it just shows the current hellscape that is living as a 20-year-old something in a big city working a big girl job. This book is literally branded as a sad girl lit book, so just keep that in mind if you decide to read it. But for me in particular, I love this genre, so it's no surprise that this book is on my list. For my 7th book, it's Atomic Habits by James Clear, and I gave this book 5 stars. This book is a practical guide on how very small changes made in your everyday life can result in life-altering outcomes just from doing a few small simple life hacks. But the author explains why these work by backing it up with psychology and neuroscience. I was initially super skeptical about this book because I honestly hate 99% of all self-help books. So I was super surprised when I picked this up to read it, and I actually liked it, and I liked it for 2 main reasons. The first is that it discussed how it doesn't matter how much of a motivated person you are, if you don't have systems in place to reach your goals, they will never happen. They're just pipe dreams, which is validating to hear as an intentionally motivated person, but sometimes I struggle to actually achieve things. And the second reason is that it actually shows you how to implement these changes in order to reach your goals. 2 of the New Year's resolutions I've had in the past 10 years is to meditate more and to stretch more. And I can honestly say this is the first year that I've done both of those things consistently, and it's because I followed the steps within the book. So the fact that the proof is in the pudding shows for something, and it is the reason why I gave it 5 stars. The next book on my list is I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel, and I also gave this book 5 stars. This is a British novel about a woman in her early 30s who's utterly obsessed with the guy she's seeing. However, it's the classic, she wants to be with him, but he doesn't want to be with her, so it ends up being a toxic situationship. But in typical fashion of not being wanted, she ends up yearning for him even more, and she also then becomes obsessed with the other women in his life, including another girl he's seeing and also his own wife. And in time, she becomes a bit of a cyber stalker by forming all these parasocial relationships and therefore becoming their fan. In the same way as Ripe, this book made me very seen when it came to the reality of situationships, because it explores unrequited love in such a raw and brutal way that I needed to hear. And I absolutely adored the protagonist when it came to the absolute batshit crazy things that she thought and did to win over this guy's attention. Like, I also just found it hilarious. And I also loved the phenomenal commentary that the book had when it came to social media, influencers, personal online branding, etc, etc, which is such a new and quickly developing sphere that I've not read really any literature on this at all, which made it super fresh and interesting to read about. And honestly, you could say that I'm a fan. And my absolute favourite book that I've read so far in 2024 is Miracle in the Andes by Nando Parrado. And I think I actually gave this book like 5.5 or 6 stars because I loved it so much. This is the true story of the 1972 Andes plane crash and rescue, where a plane originally carrying 40 people from Uruguay to Chile ended up crashing in the Andes Mountains. And the book retells how the final 16 survivors endured the 72 days of horrific conditions. There's various books written on this true event, but this one is written by Nando Parrado, who arguably saved all the others because he decided to walk the Andes Mountains. Just FYI, the film Society of the Snow is actually based on this event, so I'd really recommend you watching the film as well. But anyway, oh my god, I don't even know where to begin in describing my sheer admiration that I have for this book. Because not to be dramatic, but this is now my new Roman Empire because I literally think about it all the time. It showcases the absolute incredibility that humans can face the most insane conditions, both mentally and physically. And it's such an interesting deep dive into the thought processes the survivors were going through throughout each of the 72 days. And it's so descriptive and visceral that as a reader, you literally feel like you're stuck with them on the mountain as well, to the point where you question yourself what you would have done if you were stuck there. And whilst it's such a sad book, it's also incredibly heartwarming in showcasing what truly matters in life, which is the connections that we have with people around us. And it's something that I very much wholeheartedly agree in, that, you know, your family and friends are going to be the ones that you remember at the end of your life, and not what job you had or the money you made and all this. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And before I start crying because it literally makes me tear up, let's wrap this video up. And there you have it. Those are my favourite books of the year that I've read so far. I'm not gonna lie, this quarter of the year for reading has actually been really fantastic for me. In past years, I've never usually had these many books that I've rated that highly. Have you read any of these books? If so, what did you think of them? And if not, let me know in the comments what were the favourite books that you read so far this year. If you like this video, please drop a like down below. It pushes my video out to other people who can hear my silly little opinions. And if you're new here, please subscribe. I make new videos every Tuesday and it'll be lovely to see you there. Plus, I'll be making these videos every quarter, so you'll be there when they come out. Feel free to also follow me on my Instagram. I post a lot more personal stuff on there, but I also post about books as soon as I finish reading them, so you can see what I rated them out of 10 and also what they're about. And thank you so much for watching. It's such a joy to be able to talk about my favourite books and to have people actually listen. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!